Hey there, everyone. Today we're talking about exit planning for small business owners and some of the special considerations that small business owners need to make when planning how they're going to get out of their business. And stay tuned, we're going to be talking all about it.
I'm David C. Barnett, and you're tuned in to Small Business and Deal Making, the podcast, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses while controlling risk. So, if you're looking to take control of your future through buying a business one day, or if you already own a business and you're looking to grow or exit, you've come to the right place. I talk about interesting things, I talk to interesting people, and I answer your questions every week right here. So, be sure to hit like and be sure to hit subscribe, and let's get to it.
Are you a small business owner that's thinking about exiting your business now or in the next few years? My team and I are here to help with our unique zero commission program that we've been using since 2016. We can show you what your business is worth, prepare the package you'll need before you meet your first buyer, even run a confidential online advertising program for you just like business brokers do. And we'll coach you through the whole process, or you can hire us to manage it all for you, including coordinating your whole sell-side deal team. Head over to howtosellmyownbusiness.com to learn about how my team and I can help you get ready by watching a series of videos we prepared that explain each step in detail. And if you're ready or just curious to learn more, reach out to us and we'll get you started or schedule a call to answer your questions. I look forward to meeting you and learning more about your business. Hey there. So, if you own a small business, you know that one day you're going to be leaving it, right? You're either going to be leaving it through selling it, or something bad will happen to the business. Maybe you'll have to close it, or something could happen to you, and you might pass on while you're still the owner of the business. But one way or another, you're going to leave the business that you're in. And on this channel, we talk about buying and selling small businesses, and a lot of people erroneously believe that selling a business or making a plan to sell a business is exit planning. Exit planning is a much larger sort of topic than just selling a business. And as we're going to describe today, selling a business in the way that we discuss a lot on this channel is actually just one of the various exit paths that an exit plan could ultimately end up illustrating for someone who owns a small business. And in one of my presentations that I give live to small business owners, I talk about exit planning and I talk about selling your business. And I actually will say on a big slide, I say that the need with an N, the need to sell your business actually represents a failure in exit planning, because a properly crafted exit plan should mean that you already have the person who's going to take over from your business lined up before you need to leave the business, and that you will not be in a position where you're actually sitting there with a business for sale waiting for the right buyer to come along and buy it. Because the problem with selling a business is that you don't ultimately control the whole timeline of the process. You don't know when the buyer is going to show up, when the right buyer is going to show up, if they're going to be qualified, if they're going to have the money, if the right buyer it wants to be in your marketplace where you are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You don't control a lot of that stuff. And I know that in a lot of online content that you might be exposed to about the world of buying and selling businesses, you hear stories about people selling a business in a few months, spending a few more months on the paperwork and due diligence and stuff, and then it's sold. Throughout the course of my career, I've met people who've sold a business in as few as 9 weeks. And I've had other people that I've worked with and who I've observed and given advice to who have struggled for 3, 4, 5 years to sell a business and have not been successful. Okay. So there's a huge gamut of experiences and reality out there for people that want to put a business up for sale. Now, I want to give a shout out to a book. This is the book, Exit Planning, The Definitive Guide by John H. Brown. I have put this into my Amazon store. If you go over to dcbbooklist.com, you can find all the books that I've read over the course of the years, both my own books and other people's books that I think are useful and good for small business owners. I really liked this book, and I like the way that the author laid out the exit planning process. A lot of what is in the book, though, would be applicable or with reference to what we commonly describe over here as mid-market businesses, though. And so today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about exit planning, but I'm going to be keeping the conversation specifically within the world of Main Street and lower middle market businesses. So we're talking about businesses that have SDE like of under half a million, EBITDA maybe up to 750 ish, 800,000 ish. Okay, to keep the conversation relevant to the viewers that I have here in this audience. So, how does one create an exit plan first off? And I'm going to start by also saying, is there such a thing as an exit planner? Is this a new kind of professional that I just call up and say, hey, I want an exit plan? And I would say that for Main Street and lower middle market businesses, there likely is not a person that would be called an exit planner. What there are would be people like lawyers, accountants, financial planners, etc., who have invested a little more in their own education to be more involved in the exit planning process. And so, for a lot of people, though, what it is going to require is it's going to require you as a business owner taking the reins of the whole idea of creating your own exit plan and coordinating amongst the different people that are going to be involved. And we're going to talk about the different people as we go through the exit plan. So, very first step in any kind of exit plan is you have to figure out what your goals are. So goals can be categorized into a couple of different categories. So you can have goals for the business, like you can have a desire for what you want it to look like after you're gone and how you would like to see it function. So some people out there might say, I don't want to sell to private equity because I'm afraid of what they might do to the company and my employees. So that would be an example, right? I want my business to carry on, but I don't want it to be rolled up into some bigger entity. So that would be a business goal. So you want to write that down because as you go through the planning process, you're going to be referring back to your goals a lot to make sure that the plan you are building is actually going to be in alignment with what it is that you want to have happen after the plan is executed. Okay. The second one would be financial. So, what amount of money do you need to live on after you are no longer in your business? For most people, the owners of small and medium sized businesses, the business represents their income stream and they're living off the money that the business is producing. So, if you no longer own the business, what is it going to take to live on? And I'm going to touch this again in a moment. And then the third one would be any kind of community goals. So this would be outside of the business itself. How does your business interact with your community, and do you have any particular goals with respect to the community? This could either be the town itself, or your business might be an important part of, I don't know, like let's say you sell beekeeping supplies. You say we're an important, member in the apiary community around the world, and we're committed to helping make sure that honeybees prosper and that the people that make their living on them, with honeybees are going to be successful as well. And it's a healthy thing, and it's good for people as a source of sweetness or whatever. Like so, think about beyond your business, so sort of the greater community. If you have any specific goals, and you may not, but this is what we're going to ask ourselves. I want to talk more specifically about the financial goal. And so, what really surprises me is when I talk with business owners who are getting up there in age, like 50s, 60s, and we start talking about the sale of their business, and then they will start throwing numbers around kind of haphazardly. And I will ask them specifically, what income do you need in retirement? And some of them don't even know. Like, and a lot of this has to do with the way people, small business owners, will sometimes intertwine their personal finances with their small business. And I had an example, well, a great example someone gave me once of a guy who owned sort of a corner store. And, whenever he needed anything at home, like milk or pasta or a can of tomato sauce or whatever it was he needed at home, he just took it from the store. Right. And this person really had no idea of how much you really needed to live on because they were kind of commingled with the enterprise. And so you need to have a realistic understanding of what kind of money you need to live on in retirement. And that will require you actually having an understanding of what a family budget would look like if you had income coming in either from investments or some other kind of thing, and you were paying the taxes on that, and then you had the net amount, and you had to figure out some kind of budget. And so, for a lot of people, what this means is actually sitting down with some kind of budget tools, or maybe the help of a financial planner, for example, to figure out what sort of money is required to retire. Now, there's all kinds of content out there. When I was in Cincinnati in March at the Economy conference, which is a financial independence retirement retire early conference, and a lot of the conversation there was about, saving up your money in your investments and then how to divest of those investments to live off the money in retirement. And it's very difficult to get into a big conversation about retirement and boil it down in a simple little way. However, here's what I'm going to point out to you. Probably the simplest way to turn retirement needs into one number is to look at something called an annuity. So, for if you don't know, an annuity is the opposite of a life insurance policy. So, in life insurance, you pay every month, and if you die, you get a big lump of money from the insurance company. An annuity, you give a big lump of money to the insurance company, and they pay you every month until you pass on. Okay. And so, um, annuities are a simple way to figure out what amount of money today is required to have a certain kind of income. So I went online and I looked up annuity calculators, and I'm not going to tell you the name of this particular insurance company because this changes all the time with interest rates and all this kind of stuff. um, annuity pricing changes all the time. And if you are actually serious about an annuity, go over to newbankingsolution.com and connect yourself with Mark Willis, because that's part of what those guys do over there at Lake Growth Financial. But in this example, I found if you wanted a $100,000 annual income from an annuity and you were 60 years old, you would have to pay the insurance company about $1.4 million. And then they would, for the rest of your life, give you $100,000 a year in monthly payments. Now, you might think to yourself, I'm giving them 1.4 million, they're gonna be 100 grand a year. If I live more than 14 years, then I'm kind of ahead. And yeah, you are, because what they do with the money is they invest it for gains. However, they also use a bit of actuarial science in this, because they know that if there's a pool of like 1,000 people in an annuity program together, some of them are gonna have car accidents and some of them are gonna get sick. And so some people are gonna pass on earlier. And so that's why you can get some compelling rates of return from annuities. So 1.4 million at the age of 60 to get 100,000 a year. Now, you out there watching me can look at that and say 100,000 a year is perfect. Others amongst you are going to say, "Oh my god, I need twice that, or I need 3 times that." Well, just multiply that 1.4 by different numbers and you're going to get an idea of what kind of lump sum is going to be required when you stop working in your business in order to have that kind of income. Now, if you wait 10 years to 70, the number goes down to 1.25 million. And if you wait another 10 years to 80, it goes down to 890,000. Isn't that interesting? Right. So figuring out how much money you need to retire is going to be involving your budget. What do you need to live on? And then you can use something like this as a planning tool, an annuity calculator as a planning tool to figure out how much money you need to accumulate. So then you have to do a gap analysis. What do you have today in wealth and retirement savings, not including the business? What do you have today? And what is the gap between what you have today and what you need? Okay. Because that gap is going to have to be filled with the sale of your business. And again, I talk all the time, and I've helped many people over the course of my career who own businesses who wanted to sell them who did none of this. And some of the terrifying things that happen to people is when they get to the closing table and then they actually talk with their accountant about the deal that they're about to sign, and they realize that after they pay the taxes that might be owed on the transaction, that they're going to be left with an amount of money that is not sufficient. And you want to guess what they do? They typically don't close. They back away and they go, "Oh my god, I'm going to have to work longer because I can't afford to retire." They should have known at the beginning how much they needed to retire. They should have known at the beginning what the transaction was going to yield them in a net basis after taxes. And this is the point of an exit plan, to actually work this stuff out in advance so that you really know what you're working towards. Now, in order to understand um, what the gap is, and if the gap is going to be a hurdle or not. The next step of this whole thing is going to, so we created the goals, then the gap analysis, number 1, 2. Number 3 is going to be, what is the business actually worth, right? Is the business going to be a big enough plug to plug the hole, the gap? So, this is where we help people. So in the beginning of this video, I told you to go over to howtosellmyownbusiness.com. If you go over there, a little ways down the page, there's going to be a video on pricing guidance, and it's the MPSP analysis service that we offer to small business owners, where we can show you what your business is likely going to sell for in a sale to a stranger, for example. And so that's going to let you know. Now, if your gap is $1 million and we do the MPSP and the MPSP says it's only $600,000 business value, then obviously selling the business in one fell swoop to a stranger is not going to fill your gap. Don't be alarmed. There are other ways to deal with this. And so once you're armed with the proper information, then you can figure out how you're going to exit, what exit path you're going to take. So, um, where this really bites buyers in the butt is there's a lot of times where somebody will go to a business broker, for example, who may not do such a great job at evaluating the business, and we've all heard about overpriced small businesses. So a very common occurrence for people that are buying a business is to go find a business that's in the right industry. The sales seem to be okay. um, they will be shown some sim or business profile showing that the business has a certain kind of cash flow, et cetera. And then they'll start looking at that business and they'll start to get into the details. And then they maybe even they make an offer on the business, which is accepted. And then they get into due diligence and then they find a problem. Right. And so recently, one of the members in our group coaching program had this happen where there was an error with respect to an ad back that was tied to the payments on a car. And principal payments are not an expense on the income statement, they happen on the balance sheet. So what happened was the broker put an add back, which increases the seller's discretionary earnings, but it should never have been an add back because the money going to the car payment was never an expense. So if it was never taken out of the income, you can't add it back to the income. What you essentially do is you end up double counting. And I made all kinds of videos on the double counting income, double counting traps in calculating SDE, and they relate usually either to dividends, but they can also relate to the principal payments on loans. So after this was discovered, it meant that the SDE of the business was like 50 grand lower than had initially been disclosed. And so what then do you think happened is the buyer said, okay, because the cash flow isn't as high as you said it was, I now have to offer less money because the business isn't worth as much. Do you think the seller's happy about that? Of course not. They've already got in their mind pegged this idea that the business is worth a certain amount of money. And so that's what they want. And a lot of the times what happens in these scenarios is even if you are 100% logical as a buyer and you present to a seller why the business isn't worth as much anymore, the seller still will not reduce the price because that would then mean that the transaction is not big enough to fill the gap that they have, right? And so as a seller, this is why it's critical to actually get a valid analysis of what the business is worth that is going to be as as accurate as it can be so that you don't end up in this kind of scenario where a mistake gets made in the cash flow normalization that ends up inflating your idea of what the business is worth, right? Once we have the business evaluated, then it's time to choose which exit path you're going to take. So you can sell to a stranger, which is what I've been describing here in the last couple of minutes. And if you sell to a stranger, you're usually going to sell for a certain price, and you may end up holding a note on that transaction. That's okay. The seller note is just going to become part of that retirement plan, right? And so I've often, talked with buyers and sellers, uh, and if there's a retirement scenario around the business sale, um, what can often happen is if there's a seller note, let's say for 4 or 5 years, and that seller note payment is enough money for the seller to live off of. Well, what that does is it means that their investments can grow untouched for the next 4 or 5 years, and they can live off that note payment, right? So it can actually be quite fruitful for a business owner because oftentimes these seller notes are at a higher interest rate. So they might be lending to the buyer at 9, 10, 11, 12%, for example. They would never get that kind of yield in any other kind of investment, and at the same time, their investments that they've accumulated over time are allowed to continue to grow, as well as sort of the lump sum down payment money that they might be getting on closing for the business could go into their investment accounts as well. And that could continue to grow over several years, uh, assuming markets go up, right? So, so the seller note thing isn't an aspect here, but selling to a stranger means you've locked in what you're going to get. There could be some kind of upside participation, some kind of earnout or bonus related to growth. Largely, though, when you sell a business, you sell it for a certain amount of money. Um, you don't have to sell it to a stranger, though. You could sell it to a family member, you could sell it to your employees, etc. And this is where we get back to the original goal setting, right? So if your goal is to have the business continue in the community that you're in and you don't want to see the business change very much and you want to see it continue to play a big part in that community, you don't want it ever to be moved or to have, certain jobs or functions moved away to other places, then being able to sell to family or employees could be a really great strategy for you. Now, if you need to sell the business for a certain amount of money to fill a financial gap, then you're going to be more limited, right? Now you need the family or employees to be able to actually pony up the amount of money you need for the business. If, for example, you've been taking money out of the business for the course of many years and you've built up your own retirement savings and you have no retirement gap, well, then you're far more free to do other kinds of things if you really prioritize your community and business future goals. For example, there's more and more content online about employee ownership trusts or special purpose trusts. People are selling businesses into trusts that are focused on certain community or economic goals or other sorts of interests, for example. And really, the people who are able to do that are people who don't need an immediate lump sum of money in order to retire. So they've used the business over the years to create a cash flow, which they have then invested in other ways that give them the greatest degree of freedom over what they do with that asset. All part of a plan, right? If if you're working every day in the business, drawing a salary out of the business, and you're spending all that money, and your only sort of asset that has any value at all is the business, then you've put yourself in a position where you've hemmed off a lot of options, and a lot of choices are sort of eliminated for you because you are kind of in this one alleyway where you're going to end up having to work until the sale of the business itself is going to plug your entire gap. Oftentimes, when you meet business owners that are like in their 70s and stuff, that's the kind of situation they're in. The reason they're continuing to run the business relates back to those annuity fees that I mentioned to you, right? So they don't have $1.4 million and the business isn't worth 1.4. So if they work another 10 years, they can support themselves over that 10 years. And now the same annuity costs less, right? So they need less to retire. And and I, I hope that doesn't happen to me. Like I'll just tell you that. Anyway, um, so when you are selling to employees or family, etc., then you can ask yourself, do I need to sell it all in one transaction, or can I extend this over a period of time while I maintain control? So now you're talking about an exit plan where your day to day activity and your ownership are on two different paths. And this is kind of an aha moment for a lot of business owners. They don't really think about this because they work in the business and they own the business. They don't really see that those two things are separate. Okay. So you could bring on an employee or a family member, your child, for example, as a part owner give more and more of the day-to-day responsibilities to them, spend more and more time on your hobbies and relaxing in that semi-retirement kind of plan, right? And if there's a profit in the business and you still are owning a good chunk of it, then you're going to be entitled to the dividends or distributions that come from that ownership interest. So this is where we can take a business that would not normally fill the gap that is required in the retirement plan of the business owner, and we can stretch the value of the business so that it will fill the gap. Okay. And the way that you do that is by continuing to participate in the profitability of the business, even though you may not be there all the time or you may have reduced your hours significantly. And then ultimately you sell at a later time. So getting back to that annuity illustration, if you wanted to leave at 60, but it wasn't worth the 1.4 million, and then instead you started to this semi-retirement where you let other people become owners and you still took a good chunk of the profits and you lived off of those dividends or distributions over the course of the next 10 years, and then you were able to buy the annuity at the lower cost after 10 more years had gone by. Well, now you've taken a business which would not have filled the gap and you've stretched it to fill the gap. Okay. Again, planning required, because you can't just show up one day and say, I'm going to put someone in charge and I'm going to semi retire. That person needs to be prepared. They need to learn the business. They need to learn the systems. They need to learn what they have to keep an eye on. They need to be someone who is coachable, who you trust, all those kinds of things, right? And this is why it needs to be something that you are looking at well before you reach the moment when you want to try to pull off a strategy like this. Is people who have not done any of this work or developed any of these people within their organization, they have no choice. They have to just sell and put it up for sale with a stranger and hope that they find the right buyer who can pay them enough money, right? Again, lack of planning really hems in your choices and your opportunity. There was an email that I got from we helped someone with one of these plans, and this person, the seller, sent me a message. He said, "David, we signed the agreement for phase one with M. M is a manager to sell 20% of the shares. In 2 years, we will get serious about phase two of the plan. We'll announce it to our team next week. Thanks for your help." Signed S for seller. So, what happened in this scenario is that the business was large and successful. Uh, the owners of the business had taken profits out over the course of time. They are very, very wealthy people. They have a lot of options now because they don't need to sell the business to secure their retirement. What they wanted to do was take one of their managers who they thought had all the characteristics required to be successful as the new owner. And what they did is they created an opportunity for that person to buy in, as you just heard, 20% of the shares. So, how did the manager get the money to buy 20% of the shares? A very tiny amount of it came from his own pocket. And guess what? The sellers financed the other amount. So, they seller financed a small interest in the business to this person. And the whole idea is now over the next 2 years, from this individual's salary and from the 20% of the profits that they're going to get, that they're going to then use those monies to pay down the seller note, and over the course of the next 2 years they should be the owner of that 20% equity stake. Phase 2, as the seller refers to it, is what happens next. And so this is what I mean by a staged plan over the course of time where you have a multi-year thing going on. So for these people, what's going to happen over the next 2 years is that that new owner is going to take over more and more of the day-to-day responsibilities that the sellers currently have. They're going to be learning all the tips, tricks, and inside stuff that they are doing in the business, and they're going to be learning whether this new potential owner has got what it takes to run their business, because they're going to be observing as this person takes more and more of the responsibility. At the end of the 2 year period, they've got options then. They could then say, you know what, we don't want to continue with this plan. We're just going to put the business up for sale. In which case, the new person who owns 20% would get 20% of the proceeds of that sale because they own 20% of the company. Or they're going to say, let's examine what else we could do. So they could sell another tranche of shares to this new owner and they could finance it as well, right? They could do the same deal again. If they did, and they spent 5 years, say, doing financing for half of their business, they would still be taking significant profits out of this business over the course of the 5 years. And then maybe at the end of that time, they say to the buyer, now you need to go to a bank and buy the balance out in one fell swoop. These plans look differently depending on who the different characters are. So, if the buyer was a child, then maybe you would be more willing to finance them into your own minority ownership position. If it's a stranger, maybe you are willing to do this until they get to 49%, and then you want them to buy you out entirely. These plans can look different for any kind of situation. So, what do we have? Setting the goals, analyzing for gaps, figure out what the business is worth, what exit path will you take? So this is the actual exit selling strategy. The last part of a exit plan is for contingencies, the what ifs. So we have a plan. What if things go off the rail in different directions? And I'll give you some examples. So what if my employee or buyer or adult child, et cetera, gets divorced? Well, that happens, right? And if their personal finances are thrown into disarray by a divorce, it could definitely derail their ability to participate in the exit plan that you've created. So, what happens then, right? You want to address this in advance and figure out what could be your options. What if the buyer passes on? Like, what if they have an accident of some kind, they pass on? Like you could potentially be taking on a co-owner shareholder, so you're gonna have to have all the proper shareholder agreements and everything in place as though you were taking on any other kind of investor or partner. So this is gonna require the help of an attorney who's experienced with these kinds of things. Um, what if you, as the seller, pass on early before the plan is completely executed? So a lot of the times when you're creating these exit plans, you're creating the different scenarios. What if I do this? What if I do this? What if I do this? And then you go to your accountant, your CPA, and you then say, well, what are the tax consequences of this plan and this plan and this plan? And they give you the story of how it's going to be affected. And so a lot of these plans are created with a view to tax efficiency, right? How can we best do this while I pay the least amount of tax? Well, what if you're halfway through one of these tax efficient rollouts and you pass away, right? What then happens? Well, then does your estate suddenly end up in a position where it has to do some kind of deemed disposition and all of a sudden there's a big tax bill? Like what happens there? And for some of this stuff, there are proven long-term strategies that have always been in place that people have done for these things. So you may, even as a 60-year-old, like realize, ooh, like there's a possibility this could happen. Maybe I better buy like a 10-year term life insurance to cover us in this particular scenario if this were to happen, right? And these are all things you want to run through with your various advisors. So you're going to be, as you build this exit plan, and for most small business people, you're the one that's going to have to be the quarterback of this plan. So you're going to be talking with your investment advisor, you're going to be talking with your CPA, you're going to be talking with your lawyer. You're going to be bouncing things off of these different people. It may feel like you should be able to have one meeting with all these people and like sort out your exit plan. But I'll tell you, I've never met anyone who's really been able to do that. Usually, it's this iterative process where you're talking with the different people and you're bringing things back and you're sitting on it and you're thinking it through. I've experimented lately with, having some of these conversations with an AI advisor that you create through a prompt. You know, act as though you are a exit planning advisor and you're going to give me advice on taxes and blah 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 blah, and then you can kind of run scenarios through the AI. However, I've caught my own AI advisor making several mistakes with respect to what the tax consequences might be of certain transactions. And I've challenged it. I've said, but if this happens, then this happens. Wouldn't this be the case? And then the AI says, "Oh yeah, you're right. I made a mistake." So you know, brainstorming is one thing. Don't rely on an AI for advice on this. You are eventually going to have to figure out what your plan is and get the input from those different players in your life in order to get a great idea of whether or not this is going to work. And of course, at the end of the day, all of this hinges upon the business being profitable and successful and worth something at the end of the day. If If you are uncertain if your business is worth anything, or you're uncertain exactly how much it might be worth, if you're at the point where you want to figure out if selling the business would actually fill your gap, again, I'd remind you, howtosellmyownbusiness.com is where we discuss all the different ways that we help people sell their business. And there's great information over there about how we do evaluations and things like that. And One of the things that I always remind people of is that small businesses are the riskiest asset class there is. There's so many different things happening all the time that could threaten a small business. And so if you are a small business owner and you're thinking about a retirement or exit plan that could stretch, I don't know, maybe you're only 45 and you're trying to think about like on a 15 or 20-year horizon, one of the things you must always consider is that something is going to happen to put you out of business. And so I always remind people that if you own a small business, you must have a plan to get chips off the table. You need to have some degree of your profitability coming out of the business and being directed towards an array of other different kinds of investments. In particular, if you have exposure to personal guarantees on bank loans for your business, then you want to make sure that your investments, savings, et cetera, that you're funneling things away to have certain creditor protection characteristics to them. And I've talked about this before in past videos where I've talked about entrepreneurs and their financial planning and stuff. And again, newbankingsolution.com, there's conversations I've had there with Mark Willis about how the bank on yourself style life insurance policies that he uses as investment and liquidity vehicles with his clients can actually help to do some of these things as well. So it's get chips off the table, have other wealth outside the business, because you never know what's going to happen in the world of small business, or what kinds of crazy things are going to happen that are going to hit you like a ton of bricks. Anyway, with that, that is exit planning for small and medium-sized business owners. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure you hit like, make sure you put a comment down below, because comments truly show the algorithm that the content of this channel are great. And if you really, 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 really want to help me out, share your experience with this channel with a friend. Share these videos onto other social media platforms, etc. Introduce more people to the content, because these videos are educational and interesting. They're also boring and very, very little engagement appeal. And I don't use sound effects or funny B-roll clips or any of that jazz to try to lure eyeballs onto the channel. So I really rely on you guys to help spread the word. And with that, I'll say thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
So, how can you learn more about buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium sized businesses? Easy. Go over to my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, where you can learn more about me and how I work with my clients. You can learn more about my books and courses that I prepared for you. You can find out how to subscribe to my email list, the YouTube playlists, and more. There's literally hundreds of hours of content there, all for free, and I'd love for you to be my guest. Special thanks go to Mark Willis at Lake Growth Financial, today's video sponsor. Mark helps people better manage their personal and business finances through the Bank on Yourself insurance strategy. This is something I've done personally, and I've seen others use it successfully for years. Go to newbankingsolution.com to find all the interviews I've done with Mark and learn more about the advantages of these programs. While there, sign up for a free consultation to learn what this solution might look like for you.